The family dinner devolved into a battlefield when the mother-in-law demanded the inheritance left by her deceased mother, a sum of $3 million. The young woman attempted to explain why she couldn't comply, but her husband abruptly cut her off. "Shut your mouth and listen to your mother," he commanded. His words landed like a death sentence. However, by evening, everything had changed. He returned home a completely different person, trembling and terrified. Hello, dear listeners. It's a pleasure to welcome you to my channel. I present to you a new and interesting story. Enjoy listening. The mother-in-law, Lyudmila Konstantinovna, arrived unannounced that Tuesday as usual. She entered with an air of ownership, kicked off her shoes right onto the clean rug, went to the kitchen, and poured herself coffee from the sezvi that Olesya had just taken off the stove. "Olesya, we need to talk," she announced, sitting down at the table and pulling the sugar bowl closer. "We need to have a serious talk." Olesya silently fetched another cup and poured herself the remaining coffee. Conversations with her mother-in-law always began the same way. "We need to talk." And each time it meant a new attempt to dictate their lives. "I've been doing some calculations," the mother-in-law continued, stirring her coffee. "You're young and healthy, renting an apartment, living hand to mouth, and I have an empty 2-room flat in the center. It would be logical to sell it, add a little more, and buy a 3-room apartment. You and Sasha would get a separate room, and I'd have mine. Everyone's happy." Olesya choked on her coffee. She and Alexander had been married for 2 years. Their cramped, rented 1-room apartment on the outskirts, with its perpetually dripping faucet and upstairs neighbors who moved furniture at night, was their small sanctuary. Here they could close the door and be alone. "Lyudmila Konstantinovna, we're managing," she said cautiously. "We don't want to burden you." "Burden me?" The mother-in-law waved her hand dismissively. "I'll help with chores, cook, clean. You both work until evening. That way you'll come home to a set table, a clean, cozy home." Olesya pictured this scenario and shuddered. Lyudmila Konstantinovna, present every day on their territory, offering unsolicited advice. "Why is there so much salt in the soup? Why are you buying such expensive sausage? There's cheaper. Alexander, you should wear a tie to work. You look like a ragamuffin." "We'll think about it," Olesya said neutrally. "There's nothing to think about," the mother-in-law snapped, slamming her palm on the table. "You're throwing money away. $28,000 for this hovel. Over $300,000 a year. It's madness." Olesya remained silent. That evening, when Alexander returned from work, she broached the subject cautiously. He listened, glancing at his phone, then sighed. "Look, maybe she's right. It would be a significant saving. Sasha, we discussed this. We wanted to save up for a down payment on a mortgage ourselves." "Save up?" He smirked. "With our salaries, I make 45, you make 38, minus rent, minus groceries, utilities. What are we talking about? We'll save 300,000 by retirement." He stood up and went to the kitchen, taking out yesterday's cutlets from the refrigerator. Olesya watched his back, her heart sinking. This was his usual approach. He never directly refused his mother, but he never agreed outright either. He simply drifted along, hoping the problem would resolve itself. 3 months ago, Olesya's Aunt Vera, her mother's sister, had passed away. She had no children, and she left her entire estate, a small 1-room apartment in the southwest, to Olesya's mother. Her mother didn't delay. She processed the inheritance, sold the apartment for $3,100,000, and gave the money to her daughter. "This is for you," she said, sitting in that very rented 1-room apartment, holding a cup of tea in an old mug with a chipped handle. "Invest it in your own home. Just don't tell anyone until you've bought it." Olesya nodded. The money was deposited into a separate bank account, $3,100,000. For the first time in her life, she had such a sum. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was freedom. She hadn't discussed it with Alexander. Well, they had, but only in passing. He knew her aunt had died and about the apartment, but when Olesia mentioned that her mother had put everything in her name, he merely nodded. Good. And went back to his perpetual phone. Lyudmila Konstantinovna found out accidentally. She overheard a phone conversation when Olesia was talking to her mother about deposit interest rates. For a week, the mother-in-law walked around with a stony expression, then came up with a new plan. "Olesia, I've been thinking," she said, smiling so broadly that Olesia immediately became wary. "Since you have money now, let's do this. I'll sell my 2-room apartment, which will bring in $2,800,000. You add your $3 million. That's almost $6 million in total. We can buy an excellent 3-room apartment, maybe even a 4-room one if we look carefully. There will be enough space for everyone." Olesia sat on the sofa, arms crossed, and remained silent. "Why are you silent?" The mother-in-law leaned towards her. "It's a perfectly reasonable offer. You're going to stay living in a rented hole when you could." "It's my mother's inheritance," Olesia said quietly. "Mine? Yours?" Lyudmila Konstantinovna straightened up. "And Alexander is yours? Or is he mine too? You're a family, after all. You should have a joint budget." "A joint budget is our salaries. And the inheritance?" "An inheritance is greed," the mother-in-law interrupted, her voice hardening. "Are you saying you'll sit on the money while my son carries all the burdens, paying rent, providing food for you? I work, too." Olesia felt a surge of anger. "And I pay for half the expenses. Half." The mother-in-law threw up her hands. "He makes 45, you make 38, and you think that's fair? You should be grateful he married you at all, without a dowry or connections." Olesia stood up, her hands trembling. "Please leave," she said softly. "Please leave." "Not a chance." Lyudmila Konstantinovna didn't budge. "I'll talk to my son. He'll set you straight." That evening, Alexander returned, looking grim. He didn't even greet her. He went straight to the bedroom and tossed his bag on the bed. "My mother called," he said without turning around. "She says you refuse to help the family." "Sasha, this isn't helping the family. It's moving in with your mother." Olesia followed him, standing in the doorway. "We discussed it. We wanted to buy our own home together." "We will," he said, turning to face her. "She's selling her apartment. We're adding your money." "My money?" Olesia felt a chill. "Sasha, this is my mother's inheritance. Aunt Vera left it to my mother. My mother left it to me. An inheritance received during marriage doesn't automatically become joint property." "What difference does it make?" he roared, making her flinch. "Are you going to tell me about some laws? My mother is 65 years old, living alone, working 2 jobs just to make ends meet. And you have $3 million in your account, and you—" "She doesn't work 2 jobs," Olesia breathed out. "She's retired and works part-time as a consultant in a store." "Don't you dare talk about my mother like that." He grabbed her shoulder, squeezing so hard it hurt. "Shut your mouth. Understand? She wishes you well, and you're being selfish. Let go." Olesia pulled away. "Sasha, what's wrong with you?" he asked, standing there breathing heavily, looking at her as if she were an enemy. "You will give this money for the common good," he said slowly, "or I don't know what I'll do." Olesia turned and walked out of the room. She grabbed her jacket, bag, and phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely zip up her jacket. Alexander Dar rushed out after her. "Where are you going, Olesia? Stop, we haven't finished talking." She didn't turn back, ran out of the apartment, and fled down the stairs. She didn't have the strength to wait for the elevator. It was April outside. A cold wind blew, and she walked quickly, almost running without looking where she was going. Her phone buzzed incessantly. Alexander, mother-in-law. Alexander again. She declined the calls and texted her mother. "Can I come over?" Her mother opened the door, looked at her face, and silently embraced her. She didn't ask any questions, just led her into the room, sat her on the sofa, covered her with a blanket, and brought tea with honey. "Tell me," her mother said once Olesia had calmed down. Olesia recounted everything, The mother-in-law's proposal, Alexander's reaction, his words. Her mother listened, her face hardening. "Now listen to me carefully," she said when Alicia fell silent. "This money is yours, not theirs, not communal, yours." Aunt Vera worked her whole life as a teacher, scrimped and saved to buy that apartment. She wanted you to have your own, do you understand? Your own. Alicia nodded, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "If you give away this money," her mother continued, "you'll never see it again. The apartment will be registered in your mother-in-law's name, and you'll be left with nothing, because you can't trust women like that." "But he's my husband." "A husband doesn't grab his wife by the shoulders," her mother said sternly. "A husband doesn't yell. A husband doesn't force you to give away your inheritance to someone else. Do you understand me?" Olesia stayed with her mother for 3 days. Alexander called every hour. At first he yelled, demanding she return. Then his tone changed. He started apologizing. He swore he'd lost it, that he was tired from work. Olesia didn't answer. On the 4th day, in the morning, there was a knock at the door. Her mother opened it. Alexander stood on the doorstep, pale, with red eyes, his shirt crumpled. "I need to talk to my wife," he said quietly. Her mother looked at Alicia, who nodded. They went out into the yard and sat on a bench by the entrance. The April sun warmed them, and sparrows hopped on the asphalt. "Forgive me," Alexander began. "I shouldn't have acted like that. Mom said you were greedy, that you didn't care about the family. I believed her." He finished for her. He remained silent, looking at the ground. "My mother wants the best," he finally stammered. "She's been alone for so many years. It's hard for her. I want to help her." "Help her," Alicia said. "With your own money, transfer it from your salary or move in with her if you want." "What are you talking about?" He turned to her. "I want us to be together, a whole family." "Sasha, your mother doesn't want to be a family." Alicia shook her head. "She wants control. She wants my money. She wants me to be grateful for every bowl of soup." "That's not true. It's just that you don't see it or don't want to see it." He stood up, walked along the bench, and returned. "Fine," he said sharply. "Fine, we won't live with my mother. We'll buy our own place. With your money, just the two of us." Olesia looked at him. She read desperation in his eyes, and something else, calculation. "No," she said. "I'll buy the apartment in my name. We can live in it, but the ownership will be mine." "What are you even talking about?" he sputtered. "I'm your husband." "A husband who grabbed my shoulder and yelled at me to shut up." Forgive me, Sasha, but after that there's no trust," Olesia said calmly. He stood there looking at her, his face changing. First shock, then anger, then something cold. "So be it," he said quietly. "You're selfish. Mom is right. You only think about yourself." "Maybe," Olesia said. "Go home, Sasha. We have nothing more to discuss." That evening, her mother-in-law sent a long voice message. Olesia listened, and a chill went through her. Lyudmila Konstantinovna spoke calmly, almost affectionately, saying she understood everything. Olesia was young, foolish, and didn't understand life, but she needed to be smarter, to understand that family was the most important thing, and money came and went. The main thing was not to lose her son. A man like Alexander would be snatched up. He was handsome, hard-working, and promising, and Alicia, unremarkable, with no special qualities. She was lucky he married her. "Think carefully," the mother-in-law concluded, "before it's too late or you'll be left alone with money but without a family. Is that what you want?" Olesia deleted the message, sat on the bed in her mother's room, and cried. Not from offense, but from relief, because everything had finally become clear. A week later, she filed for divorce. Alexander didn't resist. He didn't even bother to meet. Everything was handled through lawyers. He immediately vacated the rented apartment and moved in with his mother. Olesia collected her belongings when he wasn't home. She didn't touch the $3 million. She put it in an account with a good interest rate and began searching for housing. She wasn't in a hurry. She looked at options, negotiated. Her mother called every evening asking how she was, if she'd changed her mind. Olesya hadn't. In June, she found a one-room apartment in a new building, 38 square meters, bright with a view of the park, $2,700,000. Olesya paid the deposit and finalized the deal. When she received the keys, she stood in the middle of the empty room and smiled. For the first time in her life, she had her own place, not rented, not with her husband, her own. She did most of the renovation herself with her mother and cousin. They painted the walls a light gray, laid laminate flooring, and installed simple furniture. Olesya chose every little detail: curtains, dishes, bedding. This was her apartment, her life. A year later, in November, she was invited to a colleague's wedding. Olesya debated for a long time whether to go or not, but finally decided. She wore a simple black dress, light makeup, and went to the restaurant. She sat at a common table, smiled, listened to the toasts, and suddenly saw him. Alexander was standing by the entrance to the hall. It turned out he was the groom's friend. He looked older, disheveled, with a kind of extinguished sadness in his eyes. Beside him was Lyudmila Konstantinovna in a tasteless, bright pink dress, all dolled up, holding her son's arm as if he were property. Their eyes met. Alexander froze. He took a step forward, but his mother tugged his sleeve, hissing something. He stopped, lowered his eyes. Olesya turned away, finished her champagne, got up from the table, and went outside for some air. It was a cold evening, the first snow, wet flakes melting on the asphalt. She stood by the entrance, wrapping herself in her coat, and suddenly laughed softly, almost silently, because for the first time she understood she was truly free. And this freedom was worth all the tears, all the sleepless nights, all the fears. Olesya returned to the hall and sat at the table. A handsome man of about 35 sat down next to her. He introduced himself. Igor worked with the groom. They struck up a conversation, and he turned out to be funny, easygoing, and free of the burden of others' expectations. By the end of the evening, he asked for her number. She gave it to him. As Alicia left the restaurant, Alexander walked past with his mother. She was talking loudly, gesturing, not letting him get a word in. He shuffled along beside her, hunched and tired. Olesya watched them go and walked to her car. She got behind the wheel, started the engine, turned up the music, and drove home, to where warmth, silence, and Aunt Vera's apartment, which had become her fortress, awaited her. And in her pocket was a piece of paper with Igor's number. And for some reason, that made her feel light.